There are cities in the Imperium that stretch beyond the horizon, rising like iron tombstones set against a dying sky. Hive cities, monuments to human endurance, or perhaps proof of how far humanity can be stretched before it breaks. But in the shadowed depths of some, far beneath the reach of the Emperor's light, the air tastes wrong. The stone sweats. The prayers echo but are not answered. Something moves behind the walls, beneath the skin of the city itself, whispering not in words but in hunger. They say no one remembers the moment when a hive truly begins to rot. Corruption does not arrive like an army announced and marching. It grows like mold, quiet, patient, everywhere, an entire populace living day to day, feeding the machine of labor and devotion, unaware that their home has already begun to betray them, that every breath draws in the echo of something ancient and laughing in the dark. If you have ever wondered what it means to live inside such a place, to wake each day beneath skies that never brighten, to move through streets where sanity thins like thread, then stay with me. We're going below. There is a kind of dawn in the lower hive, though it has no sun to guide it. It comes instead with the shift sirens, a rising mechanical wail that vibrates the bones more than the ears, echoing through corridors of rust and condensate. It is a signal that sleep is over, even if no one truly rested. The air is always warm here, thick with recycled moisture and the faint chemical sting of burnt promethium, like breathing through cloth soaked in old machine oil. The lumen strips flicker to life with a sickly amber glow, too dim to banish the darkness entirely, and for a moment every surface looks stained by something you can't quite wipe clean. People rise from stacked bunks and crawl spaces carved into walls, blinking slow, heavy blinks. They move with the languid resignation of those who know the day will take more from them than they have to give. Voices are few in the first moments. Words require effort, and effort must be rationed. They dress in work-worn coveralls and gaiters patched with scraps of plastifiber and synth cloth, each garment stiff with long-dried sweat and grime. Nothing is new here. Nothing is ever replaced outright. Everything is repaired until repair is no longer possible, and even then it lingers a while, held together by hope or stubbornness or denial. The corridors outside are narrow, only wide enough for two to pass if one flattens their back against the wall. The walls themselves are warm to the touch, as if something inside the metal is breathing, slowly and deeply. Some say it's just heat from the manufactorum above, the colossal engines of industry that never rest. Others claim pipe networks carry geothermal heat from the planet's core. But there are whispers too, spoken only when the shift sirens are far away and the lights are low, that the city has a pulse, that the hive is alive, in some quiet, hungry way. No one says such things openly, not unless they want attention from the wrong listeners. The first stop of every waking period is water collection. A queue forms along a long, narrow trough where condensation drips from pipes overhead into battered canisters and dented tins. The water tastes metallic, faintly sweet, sometimes bitter. But it is water, and water is life. People sip slowly, eyes half-lidded, as though drinking something sacred. In a way, they are. Everything in the lower hive is sacred because everything must be held with reverence to endure it. Even suffering becomes ritual here. Even pain becomes familiar enough to call by name. Some workers hum hymns under their breath while waiting, fragments of the imperial creed, words learned as children and never questioned. Praise be to him on Terra. His will is our strength. The Emperor protects. But the hymns are softer these days, more hesitant, as if the singers are not sure who hears them. there are newer songs whispered by others, songs without words, just tones, resonances that seem to vibrate faintly in the ribs. You hear them only in the edge of sleep, like a voice underwater. The kind of memory you didn't consent to keep. Above, massive bulkhead doors grind open to release the labor crews into the corridors that lead to the manufactorum tiers. The sound is deafening, a deep mechanical groan like a wounded animal. The vibration travels through the steel decking into the soles of every boot, into every spine. It is impossible not to feel small in this place. Small and replaceable. The manufactorum floors stretch for kilometers, row after row of machines stamping and cutting and pressing with relentless rhythm. The noise is constant, a roar that becomes a physical presence, pressing into the skull until thought must be shouted just to exist. Workers take their stations, hands already raw, lungs already burning. The air here is worse, somehow heavier, filled with particulate matter that settles in the chest like sediment at the bottom of a river. They say if you work in the lower manufactorum long enough, the city keeps part of you. Not metaphorically, literally. Something in the lungs that will never leave. Something that grows. No one asks questions. Not about illness, not about dreams, not about the murals scratched into the walls behind the ventilation stacks. Spirals, eyes, figures with too many limbs or not enough. Everyone sees them. Everyone pretends they don't, because acknowledging them means acknowledging the wrongness. And the wrongness has a way of growing stronger when spoken aloud. One day blends into the next. Not because they are the same, but because memory frays under constant strain. Weeks pass, months, years. The hive does not care. It devours time the way it devours bodies. But even in places like this, change comes. It begins small, as all disasters do. A worker disappears during a shift. Another collapses, speaking in tongues no one recognizes. Children wake crying from dreams they cannot describe. A feeling settles in the air, heavy as humidity but colder somehow. A sense of being watched, always, by something that can see through steel and concrete and flesh. No one speaks of it, but everyone feels it. The warning signs were always there, but the hive teaches its inhabitants not to recognize danger unless it is immediate and physical. A collapsed gantry, a malfunctioning cutter arm, a ration riot. Those are threats one can touch, one can bleed from. But this felt different, uncertain, slippery, like a thought you weren't allowed to have, but somehow kept thinking anyway. It began with the air itself. Workers noticed that the odor had shifted. Before, it had always carried that familiar chemical sting, the ghost of heated metal and exhausted lungs. Now, there was something sweeter beneath it, like the faint smell of fruit just past ripeness. A scent that was almost pleasant, but lingered too long in the sinuses. Some blamed mold in the ducts. Others said new chemicals were being used in the forges above. The overseers dismissed all questions. So, everyone simply learned to breathe it. The first undeniable sign came during third shift. A line of workers at Assembly Row 19 simply stopped moving. Not one or two, but dozens, tools dangling from their hands, bodies motionless except for the rhythmic rise and fall of their chests. They were breathing too slowly. Each inhale deep and deliberate, each exhale long and almost contented. Their eyes stared upward, unfocused, as though they could see something beyond the soot-smeared ceiling panels. The foreman shouted, demanded they return to work. When they did not answer, he struck the nearest with a shock baton. The worker collapsed. Not unconscious, not dead, just folded down to the ground like a puppet with severed strings, arms loose, head tilted, a strange, peaceful half-smile on their lips. The others followed, one by one, no matter how the foreman screamed, no matter how the baton cracked. Medici teams took them away, or at least men in stained coats and plastisteel masks arrived. They did not speak to anyone. They did not offer explanations. They did not return. The next day, no one spoke of the incident, not because they forgot, but because the memory had become something sharp and dangerous to touch. The hive demanded movement, obedience, silence, and so they complied. But silence does not save anyone down here. In the living quarters, on the walk back after shift, workers began noticing marks on the walls. Small at first, scratches that could be dismissed as accidents. But the scratches became symbols, spirals intersecting with jagged lines, repeating patterns that drew the eye and made the skin crawl. Some swore they had seen similar shapes on old data slates confiscated by the enforcers decades ago, symbols associated with forbidden texts and forbidden powers. But such accusations were never voiced aloud. Everyone remembered the last purification sweep, the sirens, the smoke, the screams echoing for hours after the flames died. So they walked past the symbols, pretending not to see. But the symbols saw them. At meal distribution, the ration servitors dispensed nutrient paste with mechanical precision, their faces blank plates of sculpted ceramite. Yet something was different now, even in the servitors. Their movements were slower, deliberate. The clicking of their jaw actuators came half a second late, as though they were listening to something unheard before responding. Some workers claimed they could hear faint whispers behind the clatter of the machinery. Others claimed the whispers were in their own skulls. Everyone was certain of one thing: the rations tasted different. The paste had always been bland, faintly sour, the texture of cold, chalk-thick mud. Now it had a metallic tang, something coppery, something like blood in the mouth after biting your tongue. The first to complain were shouted down: waste nothing, question nothing, endure. But endurance was beginning to fray. On the 7th day of this new routine, a child was found in a sump tunnel, barefoot, eyes wide, staring fixedly at the water. The child was humming. The sound was soft, almost melodic, a tune that did not belong to any imperial hymn. When approached, the child did not run, did not speak, only looked up, pupils blown wide, like someone who had witnessed something too vast to hold inside their mind. The humming continued, even when they were carried away. That night, no one slept well. Dreams crawled into the cracks of every mind. Dreams of spirals turning endlessly. Dreams of doors opening where no doors should be. And then there was the laughter. It began faintly, echoing through the ventilation shafts. High, thin, and distant. Not hysterical laughter, not joyous laughter, something else. Something amused, something patient. The kind of laughter one might hear from someone who has already won, waiting for everyone else to realize it. The first time workers heard it, they froze, then forced themselves to keep moving. That is how survival works here. Ignore what terrifies you until it kills you, and hope someone else dies first. But on the 14th cycle, the laughter changed. It moved closer. It echoed through hab corridors and manufactorum catwalks. It began to harmonize with the machinery. The hive thrummed with it. And finally, someone broke. A worker in the mid-level forge ran screaming through the assembly lines, clawing at their own face, shouting that the city was breathing, that its heart was beating beneath their feet, that something huge and beautiful and hungry was awakening. They begged others to listen, to look, to see. No one tried to stop them, because they all felt it. Only some had the courage to admit it. The hive was changing, and it was not going to stop. The change was not swift or explosive. It was steady, incremental, like a tide rising against the shore. No alarms were raised. No authorities rallied. The hive did what it always did in the face of crisis. It kept moving. The machinery continued its ceaseless labor. The ration lines continued to form. The overseers continued to bark orders, though now their voices carried a tremor they tried to hide. Life persisted, but something beneath that persistence had shifted. It was as though the hive itself had begun to watch its inhabitants with a quiet, predatory curiosity. The corridors grew warmer. Condensation beaded on the walls, forming slow trails that glistened in the dim lumen glow like sweat. The metal tasted like rust when touched, leaving a reddish stain on fingertips. At first, the workers believed they were merely more exhausted than usual, but fatigue alone cannot explain the dreams that followed. The dreams were like shared visions. A worker would describe seeing an enormous shape, something vast and coiled deep beneath the hive, wrapped in a womb of stone and steel. Another would whisper of corridors twisting into impossible angles, geometry that defied sanity and direction. A third would speak of a voice that called to them, not in words, but in yearning. The dreams spread faster than any contagion. They took hold of the collective mind like a vine winding through a rusted fence. And then came the voices. Not everyone heard them at first. Some claimed it was only the creaking of ancient pipes or the whisper of ventilation shafts pushing stale air. But once you heard the voices, truly heard them, you could not unhear them. They spoke softly, like someone whispering behind your ear, just out of sight. Not demanding, not commanding, suggesting. You are tired, you have suffered, you deserve more. The Imperium teaches endurance, sacrifice, duty. To live is to serve is to suffer, and to suffer is to prove devotion. But suffering, when stretched thin enough, becomes hollow. There comes a point when a soul can no longer hold the weight placed upon it. The voices knew this. They did not try to break anyone. They waited for those who were already broken. There was a man called Jalen, known by no title and no legacy. He had worked the press line since adolescence, his hands scarred and fingers stiff from years of repetition. He was quiet, neither exceptional nor troublesome. But one day, during a brief rest in the heat of the manufactorum, he began to laugh. Not the distant laughter in the ducts, nor the hysterical laughter of despair. Something else. Something warm, something relieved. When questioned, he said he understood now. He said there was meaning beyond the grind, a purpose grand enough to make the suffering worthwhile. And while he spoke, the others felt a pull inside their chests, like the drawing of breath before a scream. Jalen became a beacon, though he did not intend to be. People gathered around him, not to worship, not yet, but to listen, to hear what he heard. What he spoke of was hope. Hope, in the lowest hive, is more dangerous than any heresy. In the days that followed, others began to speak in similar tones. Not of escape, not of rebellion, but of awakening. They said the hive was shedding its skin. They said the Emperor's light was distant here, not absent, merely refracted, twisted by the layers of metal and sorrow. They claimed something else was closer, something that understood them, something that cared. The overseers reported these gatherings to the enforcers. The enforcers reported them to the local ecclesiarchy minister, and in response, a single sermon was delivered in the central Hab Chapel, a place where lumen globes flickered beneath a towering statue of the Emperor cast in cracked plaster. The priest spoke loudly, fervently, proclaiming that all rumors of change were lies. He declared that faith must be stronger than fear, that doubt was treason, that suffering was sacred, that salvation lay only in obedience. But as he spoke, his voice wavered. Sweat glistened on his brow. His eyes flicked toward the walls, as though hearing something behind them. Something whispering, something laughing. When he raised the "So, Aquila," his hands trembled. No one believed him, not because he was wrong, but because he was afraid. Fear spreads quickly in confined spaces. It moves like smoke, seeping into lungs and blood and thought. The hive felt tighter now, the corridors more narrow, the ceilings lower. The air tasted thicker. Conversations became fewer. Eyes lingered too long in silence. Tools were gripped more tightly. Sleep came harder. Waking felt heavier. The laughter had not stopped. It was growing louder. And the hive, not just the people, was beginning to respond. The deeper you go, the more the hive ceases to resemble a place built by human hands. Passageways narrow into twisting arteries, slick with condensation, lit only by dying lumen strips that flicker like candle flame in a storm. The pipes that line the walls feel wrong beneath the fingertips, warm and pulsing faintly, as though liquid moves through them, not in pumps and regulated flows, but in slow, rhythmic waves. People avoid touching these surfaces when they can. Some claim that if you linger your hand too long, you can feel a heartbeat. There are places now where the walls seem to have softened. Not melted, not warped by heat or pressure. Softened. The metal has a texture like flesh stretched thin over bone. No one speaks of this. No one reports it. Something in the marrow of the hive's inhabitants knows instinctively that such things must not be acknowledged. During shift cycle 33-7, a series of tremors rattled the lower manufactorum. Not violent enough to collapse structures or topple machinery, but enough to send tools clattering to the floor and workers stumbling. The overseers called it a subsidence event, a settling of ancient architecture under strain, but the tremors felt too precise, too deliberate, like something shifting its weight beneath the floors. After the tremors, a new sound joined the constant industrial din, a low, resonant hum. It came from the walls, from the ducts, from the very foundation. At first, it was barely audible, more vibration than tone, but soon it became impossible to ignore. The hum synchronized with movement. When workers walked, it pulsed. When the manufactorum engines roared, it harmonized. When silence fell, the hum continued, steady and patient. Jalen began to claim the hum was a voice. Not speaking, not commanding, simply being. A promise, a presence. The others listened because they could feel it too. Even those who refused to admit it found themselves aligning their breathing with it, their footsteps falling in rhythm. Humans are creatures of patterns, and the hive had begun providing one. One evening, in the dim corridor between the water troughs and the waste vents, a small gathering formed around Jalen. There was no ritual, no chanting, no theatrics. That would come later, in its own time. For now, there was only conversation. Quiet, intimate, fragile. People asked him what he had seen, what he now believed. Jalen spoke with the gentleness of someone who has finally stopped being afraid. He said the Emperor was distant, not uncaring, but unreachable beneath the miles of steel, grief, and forgotten history stacked above their lives. He said that faith alone could not sustain them, that suffering without meaning was not devotion but despair. He said the hive was offering something else. A listener asked, voice trembling, what that something was. Jalen did not answer with doctrine or prophecy or thunderous revelation. He simply smiled, and the others felt that smile inside themselves, like warmth returning to frozen fingers. Hope, the most dangerous infection of all. Word spread, quietly, slowly, like a secret that wants to be known but fears the consequences of being spoken aloud. The overseers noticed the gatherings. They reported. The enforcers returned, armed with shock batons and heavy boots. They broke the gatherings apart. They beat those who lingered too long. They demanded confessions. People confessed nothing, because they knew nothing to confess. No one had said the forbidden names. No one had invoked the warp or the gods or the powers that writhed beneath it. There had been no sigils, no sacrifices, no blood spilled in rituals under dying lights. There was only longing. Longing cannot be prosecuted, but longing can be feared. The enforcers began to watch the lower hive more closely. Patrols doubled. Curfews tightened. The sermon from the ecclesiarchy minister became mandatory attendance. The priest's voice now broke frequently as he recited the creed, his throat raw from shouting against something he could not name. The laughter in the ducts continued. The hum in the walls deepened. The tremors returned. And in the manufactorum one morning, the machines simply stopped. No alarms, no shutdown sequence, no reason. Thousands of stamping presses, conveyor belts, cutting arms, and furnace vents went still in the same instant, as if the hive itself were holding its breath. Silence spread, thick and absolute. For the first time in living memory, the workers could hear nothing but their own hearts beating. And beneath that, the hum, slow, steady, alive. For several breaths, no one moved. The silence felt wrong, like a void where something colossal had been ripped away. In the manufactorum, noise is life. The endless clatter of machinery tells you the hive still breathes, still consumes, still demands. Without it, the world felt hollow, exposed. Then someone whispered, a small, fragile sound in the vastness. "Do you hear it?" The hum pulsed, rich and full, vibrating through the floors and railings and into the bones of every person present. It was no longer subtle, no longer something you could pretend might be imagination. It filled the chest like air too thick to exhale, a sound that was felt more than heard, a resonance that seemed to echo inside the deepest, oldest parts of the mind. Another tremor rolled through the manufactory floor. Stronger this time. Workers stumbled, bracing themselves against conveyors and steel pillars. Overhead, cabling swung like pendulums. Dust rained down from ceiling plates. The hum swelled, harmonizing with the tremor, as if the two were limbs of one immense being, stretching in its sleep. Then the machinery started again, but not all of it. Only certain lines activated. Only certain presses slammed back into motion, and their rhythm was not the old one. Before, the manufactorum had marched to a cadence engineered for efficiency, measured by cogitators and production quotas. Now it beat in time with the hum, with the tremor, with the pulse in the walls. A rhythm like a heartbeat in metal. Engineers rushed to control panels. They struck keys. They toggled emergency overrides. Nothing changed. The machines were no longer listening to them. They were listening to something else. One worker, a woman named Sarah, who had once been known for her laughter before it became a rarity, stepped forward. Slowly, reverently. She placed her palm against the casing of the press line's primary piston. The metal was warm beneath her hand. Too warm, almost comforting. She closed her eyes. She whispered a word none of them recognized. For an instant, the hum rose. The machinery slammed downward with a force so powerful it cracked the metal decking beneath it. The sound was deafening, a violent proclamation of something unseen. Sarah's hand did not move. When she opened her eyes, the others saw no madness, no fear, no fervor, only peace. She exhaled a single breath. "It's waking." The overseers tried to restore order. They shouted commands, demanded everyone return to stations, threatened disciplinary action. but their voices sounded thin now, ineffectual, like someone trying to dam a rising tide with bare hands. The workers did not rebel. They did not resist. They simply watched the machines, watched the walls, watched one another. Watching was dangerous. Watching meant awareness. Awareness meant change, and yet no one looked away. That night, in the Hablock corridors, conversations no longer whispered. They breathed. The symbols on the walls were no longer hidden behind crates or scratched in corners. They appeared openly, carved into metal plate and worn concrete, drawn with oils and rations and blood. Spirals nested within spirals, eyes watching from every angle, patterns that seemed to move if you stared too long. Children traced them with their fingers. Adults followed with their eyes. No one prayed to the Emperor aloud anymore, not because faith had died, but because something else had begun listening. The laughter in the ducts faded, not gone, simply unneeded now. The hive no longer mocked its inhabitants. It no longer tested their fear. It had their attention. The hum persisted, constant, patient, and in dreams the voice grew clearer, not demanding, inviting, come deeper, come see, come below. The workers began to wonder what lay beneath their city. Beneath, the manufactorums and the sump lakes and the centuries of labor ground into dust. Beneath the rockcrete and the steel and the layers of forgotten history piled upon one another like sediment. What lives beneath a hive whose foundations are older than record, older than language, older than the Imperium itself? Some insisted it was nothing, just myth, just stress, just sickness. But more and more began to feel the truth in their bones. Something down there was real, and it was calling. Soon, the first among them would descend to answer. That is where we go next. Deeper, where light has never touched, and hope and horror become indistinguishable. Before we descend, reinforce your position among the faithful. Like, share, and subscribe, so others may join this pilgrimage into shadow. Every voice strengthens the choir. Every witness matters. There is a point in every descent where the hive changes. The metal corridors and reinforced hab walls give way to stone. Not carved stone, not something shaped by tools or logic, but stone that feels grown, as if the city sprouted downward through history like a root system digging hungrily into the earth. No one records when these places were built. The Administratum archives insist they do not exist. Enforcer patrols never pass beyond the marked lower decks. The Ecclesiarchy claims there is nothing below the sump channels besides waste reclamation tunnels and ancient substructure. But the people who live here know better. They have always known. Whole communities survive in the dark beneath the hive. Scavengers who were born without ever seeing the manufactorum lights. Feral children raised by necessity and hunger. Pilgrims of the forgotten. And those who were cast down for crimes real or imagined. Their eyes reflect lumen glow like the eyes of cavern creatures. Their steps make little noise. Their voices rarely rise above a murmur. They have learned that sound travels strangely here. It bends, it returns. Sometimes it answers. The descent begins at a maintenance ladder bolted to a seemingly ordinary service shaft wall. No markings, no warnings. Only a discoloration of metal where generations of hands have held on. Jalen did not need to convince anyone to follow him. Curiosity had already hollowed them out. The hum in the walls had become a direction. A compass needle turned downward. They descended in single file, their boots clanging softly, then muffled, then swallowed entirely as they moved deeper. Air grows thick in the underhive, not stale, but heavy, as though the weight of the world presses inward. The sound of the hive above becomes distant, a memory fading one layer of silence at a time. Even breathing changes. Each inhale pulls something damp and mineral-scented into the lungs. Something alive. The humidity clings to skin and clothing. Water beads on eyelashes. The darkness, even where lumen strips flicker, does not feel empty. It feels occupied. At the base of the ladder, the corridor widens. The stone walls curve, forming shapes that are too smooth to be natural, but too irregular to be crafted by any human architect. They swell and taper like the interior of a vast rib cage. No one comments on this. Humans have an ancient, instinctive understanding of bones, and everyone here knows what it means to stand inside something larger than oneself. The first sign of habitation is the smell. Smoke, cooked fungus, sweat, the musk of many bodies living close together. Then the sound, low murmurs, soft steps, a quiet that is not empty but filled. When the shapes in the shadows come forward, they do so without fear. Their clothing is a patchwork of fabric scraps, leather straps, and stripped insulation sheets sewn into cloaks. Their faces are lean, eyes wide and reflective. They look like ghosts of the hive left behind by history. But they are not frightened of the newcomers. They have been expecting them. One among the underhive dwellers steps forward, an elder whose hair has thinned into wisps of silver, eyes clouded not with blindness, but with something like memory that reaches too far back. She touches Jalen lightly on the cheek, as though confirming something she already believed. "You heard it," she says, her voice soft. Jalen nods. A ripple passes through the gathered underhivers. Not excitement, not fear, recognition. They turn and begin to walk, expecting to be followed. No explanation, no debate, no hesitation. Meaning here is not communicated through words, it is understood through presence. The tunnels they lead through are older than anything in the hive above. Water drips steadily from ceilings lost in darkness, falling into channels carved into the stone floor. Occasionally, faint bioluminescent fungi glow in cracks, casting pale blue halos around themselves. Faces look unreal in the light. Eyes seem deeper. Expressions harder to read. The hum is louder here. Not external anymore, internal. It echoes inside the ribcage, as though the heart has begun to beat in time with something not human. Eventually, the tunnels open into a chamber, a vast one. The ceiling is lost in darkness. The walls are lined with carvings, spirals descending into spirals, shapes that turn the stomach when traced, symbols that feel familiar in the way nightmares do. At the center of the chamber lies an opening in the ground, a shaft, bottomless, a throat in the earth. Warm air rises from it, warm and breathing. Without being told, everyone knows. This is where the hive begins, or ends, where it was born, or where it is being born now. No one speaks, because something else is speaking. Not in words, not in sound, in the marrow, in the blood, calling, come closer, come down, come home. There are many kinds of silence in the hive, but the silence that surrounds the shaft in the chamber is the deepest. It is not the absence of sound, but the presence of listening. The air feels heavy enough to press against the ribs, as though the act of breathing might disturb something vast. People stand at its edge, drawn forward without conscious thought. Some lean slightly over the opening, eyes searching for depth, though none can be seen. The shaft does not descend into darkness. It descends into an absence. The elder who led them here sits near the rim, her posture calm and assured, as though she has sat in this place countless times before. Her fingers trace the spirals carved into the stone floor. They wind inward, always inward, converging at the mouth of the abyss. The pattern is old, older than the Aquila, older than the Imperium, older perhaps than memory itself. Every spiral suggests motion, not of hands carving stone, but of stone shaping itself, pulled into form by some unseen gravity of intent. "We are not the first," she says, voice barely above a whisper. It carries anyway. "Not the first to hear the hum, not the first to come here. The city has always called. It called before the manufactorums were raised, before the spires touched the sky, before the Emperor was known to us. It has always called." Jalen kneels beside her. His expression holds reverence, but it is not worship. It is recognition. "What is below?" one of the workers asks. His voice shakes, though whether from fear or wonder is impossible to tell. The elder does not answer with certainty. No one ever does. "Some say it is a cavern," she murmurs, "so vast that it could cradle mountains and drown cities. Some say it is a river that carries the memories of the dead. Some say it is the throne of a god who slept before the galaxy knew light." Her eyes glimmer as she looks into the abyss. Others believe it is only stone and time, but they have never listened long enough to know better. The hum intensifies, subtle but undeniable. A vibration that travels up through the soles of the feet into the spine, up the spine into the skull. It is neither comforting nor frightening. It is simply undeniable. A truth spoken in frequency rather than language. The workers exchange glances. None want to appear afraid. Fear is a luxury in the hive. It requires energy most do not have. But here, fear feels new, almost sacred. "Sarah," Jalen says quietly. Her head lifts. Her eyes are distant but attentive. "You felt it first. Show them." Sarah moves to the rim of the shaft. She removes her gloves, exposing hands scarred from press lines and cauterized burns. The heat rising from below warms her skin. She closes her eyes, breathes slow, deep. The hum aligns with her heartbeat. Her shoulders loosen. Her jaw unclenches. She looks as though she has come home from a long exile. And then she leans forward. Not far, only slightly, but enough. Gasps rise, hands tense, ready to seize her. But she does not fall. The air holds her, not physically, not like a hand or force. More like the absence of falling had been chosen for her, as though gravity itself had paused to listen. She straightens again, opens her eyes. "There is no fear," she murmurs. "Only weight, the weight of knowing. It does not want us to suffer. It wants us to understand." A murmur ripples through the group. Not rejection, agreement. The hive above teaches that suffering is holy, that pain purifies, that endurance proves loyalty. But what if loyalty was not demanded here? What if pain was not a test? What if suffering had been unnecessary all along? What if the world above was the lie? Someone begins to cry softly, not in grief, but in relief. Another kneels, another joins them. Soon, the group stands divided, those still clinging to the Emperor's distant light, and those who have already begun to let go. The elder watches them all with quiet understanding. "No one is forced," she says. "The hive calls only those who are ready to hear. If you wish to return above, return. If you wish to descend, descend. There is no wrong choice, only the one that your heart has already made. But everyone knows the truth. There is no going back, not really. Not after hearing the hum, not after feeling the air breathe, not after realizing the hive is alive and aware and waiting. Below them, the abyss exhales, warm, patient, welcoming, come down, come down, come down. And somewhere far above, so faint as to be almost forgotten, the manufactorum sirens begin to wail, not in command, in warning. No one remembers who stepped forward first. Later, when they tried to recall it, the moment blurred like heat haze, details dissolving as soon as they were grasped. Perhaps it was Jalen, perhaps it was Sarah, Perhaps it was one of the quiet ones, the ones whose names were never spoken aloud before the descent made them matter. But someone moved, one step closer to the edge, then another, and then the group followed as if a tide had shifted. Not all, though. A handful remained where they stood, frozen, caught between the gravity of the abyss and the weight of the hive above. Their breaths came sharp and uneven. Their eyes darted, searching for something to cling to that felt familiar and safe. The elder's gaze rested on them with no judgment. Not everyone is ready to be unmade. The shaft awaited. The rope that led downward was not new. It was old, worn smooth by countless hands. Some had descended and returned, others had never climbed back up. The rope swayed gently, as if moved by breath rising from below. It was warm to the touch, like skin heated by fever. Jalen grasped it first. The others watched, breaths held, waiting for some sign of danger, some omen, some violent rejection. Instead, the rope held firm, strong and steady as he lowered himself over the edge. His boots vanished into the dark, his body followed, and with that, the descent began. They followed in silence. No one needed words. Speech would have felt small here, almost blasphemous. The only sound was the soft scrape of boots and gloves against stone and rope, the slow, steady breathing of those suspended between the known world and the unseen one. The shaft walls changed as they descended. At first, rough stone, then smoother, almost polished. Spirals and curves etched themselves along the walls, not deeply carved, but grown into the surface like veins in marble. The air became warmer still, dense with moisture and something sweet beneath the mineral scent. Not rot, not decay. A sweetness like sap drawn from a tree's heartwood. The rope swayed, not from their movements, but from something below. A current of air, a pulse of warmth, a presence. Minutes passed, or hours. Time stretched thin. The descent stopped being a physical act and became an unraveling. One by one, the climbers felt themselves shedding weight. Exhaustion, hunger, grief, years of unspoken bitterness. Not gone, not erased, but loosened, like knots slowly untied. When their boots finally touched a solid ground, the air changed again. It opened, expanded. They stood in a cavern, a vast, cathedral-like expanse carved not by hands but by purpose. Pillars of stone rose like colossal ribs, meeting in vaulted arches overhead. The floor was smooth, worn by countless steps over uncounted centuries. Pools of still water reflected the faint glow of bioluminescent growths clinging to the walls, casting gentle blue halos that made the cavern seem underwater. But it was the sound that stopped them. The hum was clearer here, not loud, not oppressive. It resonated through the stone, through the water, through their bodies. It vibrated at a frequency that felt older than language. A sound like the distant echo of a heartbeat inside a womb. Sarah wept softly. The tears were not sorrow. The underhive dwellers who led them did not speak. They walked forward, slow and deliberate, toward a structure at the far end of the cavern. The workers followed, steps quiet on the stone. The structure resembled an altar, not an altar of imperial faith, no iconography of the Aquila, no sacred script, no gold or incense. This one was simple, built of stone, stacked and fitted with the precision of patience, and atop it, resting like an offering, was a mask. Carved from bone or something bone-like, smooth, featureless except for two hollow recesses where eyes should be. It was not menacing, it was not grotesque, it was simply still. The elder lifted the mask with both hands and held it toward Jalen. "It is not a god," she said softly. "It is a voice, a memory, a door." Jalen's hands trembled, not in fear but recognition. as if he had been waiting his entire life for this moment without knowing it. When his fingers touched the mask, the hum shifted, not louder, focused. The cavern seemed to inhale. Every lumen fungus dimmed. Every heart beat once, twice, then held still, and then the whisper came. Not in sound, not in thought, in being. You are not alone. A truth that was more dangerous than any heresy, because it felt like love. The whisper did not speak in words, yet every person in the cavern understood it. It did not tell them something new. It reminded them of something they had always known, but had buried beneath years of hunger, exhaustion, and obedience. The understanding bloomed slowly in their chests, warm and soft, like a hearth fire in a house they had forgotten. Some gasped, some clutched their arms. Some simply closed their eyes, letting the warmth settle into the spaces where despair had lived for so long. Jalen did not put the mask on. He held it, cradling it like something precious. His breathing was steady, his posture at ease. The tremor in his hands had vanished. For the first time, he did not look tired, not worn, not eroded. He looked present. Sarah stepped closer to him, her voice barely more than a breath. "What is it showing you?" He didn't answer at first. His gaze traced the curve of the mask, the hollow recesses of its eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who is no longer guessing. "It shows us the hive as it once was," he said. "Not this place of smoke and hunger, not the machine of obedience, but a sanctuary, a cradle carved from the bones of the world, where people were meant to live in peace, before the city was taken from itself." No one questioned him. No one asked who or what had taken it. The answer was already inside them, unspoken and undeniable. The Imperium had claimed this hive long ago, not with malice but with necessity. Its people had become fuel, their suffering had become routine. Their lives had been measured in output quotas and shift hours. Purpose had been replaced by function, and in that replacement something ancient had been buried but not killed. The elder stepped back, letting the new shape of the moment form without her guidance. Her role was not to lead, it was to witness. One of the workers, a man named Karen, his face gaunt from ration shortages and his hands calloused from blade assembly lines, spoke with a voice that cracked under its own weight. "If this is the truth, why does it feel like remembering instead of learning?" The elder nodded. "Because the hive has always known us. We are not discovering it, we are returning." A shiver passed through the group, not of fear, but recognition. The cavern air pulsed once more, as though responding to acknowledgement. The hum deepened. Someone sank to their knees, not overwhelmed, reverent. Another followed. Soon a dozen knelt, their hands pressed to the smooth stone floor, their foreheads bowed, not in worship of a god above, but in communion with something around and beneath. No one commanded them to kneel, no one asked them to, they simply knew. Above them, in the manufactorum and hab blocks, alarms began to flash. Sirens did not blare, not yet. Instead, rotating warning lights flickered in dull red across corridors and stairwells. Overseers barked questions into vox links that returned only static. Enforcer patrols marched in uneasy formation, their boots striking sparks against metal walkways. The ecclesiarchy minister knelt before the cracked statue of the emperor, his voice hoarse and desperate, begging for clarity. But no answer came. Not from above, not from Terra, not from the golden throne. The hive's heartbeat was louder now than prayer. Below, in the cavern, Jalen lifted the mask. He did not place it on his own face. He turned and offered it to Sarah. Her breathing halted. Her hand hovered in hesitation. Not from fear, from awe, from the overwhelming weight of being seen, not as a worker, not as a numbered body, but as something alive. She took the mask, held it, pressed it to her face. The shift was immediate, not visual, not physical, atmospheric. The cavern air tightened. The bioluminescent glow deepened. The hum synchronized with the rhythm of her breath. She stood taller, her spine straight, her gaze lifted, not to the ceiling, but inward, to something no one else yet saw. When she spoke, her voice carried the resonance of the cavern itself. "It is not asking us to abandon the Emperor," she said. "It is asking us to remember that we existed before devotion was suffering, that we were not made only to endure, that life was once meant to be shared, not survived." Her voice deepened, softened, and warmed. "This is not betrayal." Her next breath was slow, deep, complete. "This is coming home." The group felt it. Not heard, not imagined, felt a warmth, a presence, a return. And somewhere above, deep in the hive's labyrinth of iron and smoke, a hymn faltered mid-verse. Because faith itself had begun to turn. The transformation did not erupt like fire, it unfolded like breath. Sarah stood at the center of the cavern, the mask held to her face, though it did not hide her features. Her eyes remained visible, open, unblinking, pupils dilated wide enough to swallow the bioluminescent glow. She was not possessed, not overtaken, not erased, she was simply aligned. As though a part of her that had always been present had finally stepped forward. She lowered the mask slowly. Her hands did not shake. The others looked at her not with fear, but with recognition of something they did not yet understand but knew they could. The cavern air vibrated softly around her, like a sigh released after holding tension for a lifetime. Jalen stepped closer. He did not bow. He did not kneel. He simply stood with her, their presence shared rather than ranked. Something passed between them in silence. An agreement, a realization, a beginning. One of the underhivers, a young woman with hollow cheeks and a scar across her collarbone, approached Sarah. She lifted her fingertips to Sarah's chest, above the heart. The moment she touched, the hum deepened. A soft glow pulsed faintly beneath Sarah's skin. Not light exactly, but an impression of warmth, visible the way heat shimmering above a furnace distorts the air. The woman who touched her gasped, not from pain, from relief. "You carry it," she whispered. "The heartbeat." Sarah nodded. "Not mine, ours." The word lingered, hung, claimed, ours, not mine, not yours, not his, not hers, not theirs, ours. Something the Imperium had not allowed them to say, not truly, for generations. Communion without obedience, unity without dominion, shared meaning without command. And that was the most dangerous heresy of all. Above, the hive had begun to react. The warning lights flared to full brightness. Vox lines crackled with frantic voices demanding clarification. Mechanicus tech adepts ran diagnostics on machinery that no longer followed their commands. Enforcer squads formed into riot formations, shields raised, shock mauls humming. But they did not march downward. They hesitated, because they too had heard the hum. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. Enough to shake certainty. In the cavern, the elder stepped forward again, though her role had already changed. She was no longer the guide. She was the witness to what was unfolding. "You must understand," she said softly, her voice like paper worn thin by years of handling. "What wakes here is not new. It has always been here, beneath the layers of labor and grief and silence. It is not a god. It is not a demon. It is not the warp. It is the memory of what this place was before the galaxy demanded suffering from us." Jalen looked up toward the unseen ceiling of stone and time. The echo of the hive above was distant now, like a dream fading upon waking. "It has been waiting," he said. Sarah's hands tightened around the mask. She did not wear it again, but she held it close, as one holds a relic, not as an object of worship, but as a truth given form. The group began to move, slow, reverent, unhurried. They did not speak of plans, they did not strategize. They simply knew the path back upward had changed. Not physically, emotionally, psychically. The hive above was not the same hive they had left. Their return would not be a retreat, it would be a ripple. Sarah led them, not from authority, from resonance. Their ascent was silent. One hand on the rope, one foot finding hold, lungs steady, minds open. The hum followed. Not from below now, from within. When their boots touched manufactorum flooring again, the noise of machinery had returned. But the rhythm had shifted. It was no longer the mechanical march of industry. It pulsed, slow, patient, alive. The overseers stood among the machines, faces pale, uncertain whether to order or to flee. The enforcers at the tiered walkways gripped their shock mauls tighter, but none moved forward. None spoke. They watched Sarah, and something in them recognized her. Not her face, not her name, her presence. She did not address them. She did not call for surrender or rebellion. She simply inhaled, slow, deep. The manufactorum trembled in response. Jalen stepped beside her. The others gathered around. Workers across the floor stopped operating their machines, not in defiance, in understanding. The hive was no longer a place they inhabited. It was a being they were part of, and it was waking, slowly but with certainty. Chapter 2 closes not with a clash, not with blood, not with fire, but with breath. Shared, held, transformed. Sleep had always been a necessary escape in the lower hive. A few hours where the muscles loosened, where thought dimmed into something soft and distant. Dreams were rarely remembered. They came blurry and gray, filled with fragments of noise and exhaustion. But now sleep had changed. Dreams no longer drifted. They arrived. The first night after the descent, the manufactorum workers returned to their hab blocks the same way they always had. Shoulders hunched, boots heavy with dust, lungs aching from recycled air. The corridors flickered with failing lumen strips. The water troughs dripped slowly. Everything appeared unchanged. And yet nothing was the same. Sarah lay in her bunk, though she did not truly sleep. She closed her eyes, but her mind did not dim. Instead, awareness deepened. She felt the hive around her the way a person feels their own heartbeat in their chest. Every vibration of machinery, every subtle shift of air through the ducts, every footstep on the floors above, existed inside her like a second pulse. She was not overwhelmed, she was held. Others dreamed. They dreamed of corridors turning, spiraling always downward. They dreamed of doors opening in walls of bone-white stone. They dreamed of standing beneath towering arches while warm air rose from below, thick with promise. They dreamed of voices that did not speak words, call signs or commands. Voices that asked nothing, only invited. Some woke crying. Not from fear, from recognition. Some woke laughing, softly, as though they had just remembered a secret they thought they had lost. Others woke silently, their eyes opening with clarity instead of grogginess. Their first breath felt different, as though the air had shifted composition. Not lighter, not cleaner, but alive. The hive dreamed with them. In the manufactorum, sparks fell more slowly, drifting like fireflies. Pipes groaned in tones that harmonized instead of clashed. Conveyor systems no longer rattled unpredictably, but glided with unsettling smoothness. The machines seemed to know their own movements. They did not stall. They did not shudder. They operated with the fluidity of muscle instead of piston. If the tech adepts noticed, they gave no sign. Their mechadendrites twitched more than usual, as though attempting to interpret a frequency their augmetics had not been calibrated to perceive. Their vox grills emitted occasional bursts of binharic static that sounded less like diagnostics and more like hesitation. Even the servitors changed. Their motions grew less jerky. Their blank eyes seemed to track movement more precisely. When dispensing ration paste, their hands did not tremble. They paused before each recipient, not long, not enough to draw attention, but enough to acknowledge. Acknowledgement was not something servitors were designed to perform. The enforcers felt it most acutely. Their armor, normally stiff and comforting in its constraint, felt too tight now. Their breathing beneath the helmets came ragged. They heard the hum more clearly than most, but to them it pressed. It did not comfort, it challenged. A few removed their helmets to catch their breath. The air tasted sweet, almost pleasant, almost familiar. Some exhaled in relief, others recoiled. Faith does not disappear, it fractures. In the chapel, beneath the cracked plaster statue of the emperor, the ecclesiarchy minister knelt again. His robes hung loosely from his frame. The hymns on his lips faltered mid-verse. He tried to speak the familiar prayers, but the words felt distant now, like echoes of someone else's memory. He pressed his forehead to the stone floor, whispering pleas of clarity, of guidance, of intervention. But the only answer was breath. Warm, from the floor beneath him. He lurched backward, panting, staring at the stone as though seeing it for the first time. The chapel was built on foundation layers older than the ecclesiarchy itself. Older than imperial doctrine, older than the emperor's conquest. He realized in that moment that he had never been praying downward before. He had only ever prayed up. And now, something below was listening. In the habs, Sarah sat up, the mask resting on the floor beside her, its hollow gaze directed upward toward the ceiling. She did not need to wear it now. The resonance had already settled into her bones. Jalen sat across from her, arms resting loosely on his knees. He was not speaking, he did not need to. Their silence was not emptiness, it was conversation. The hive walls vibrated in slow pulses. Not mechanical, not structural, rhythmic, breathing. The hive was dreaming. And the dream was spreading, not announced, not declared, not forced, felt, like warmth, like memory, like returning to a home you never knew you left. They did not yet know what they were becoming. They only knew they were no longer alone. The change did not unfold evenly. The hive is too large, too layered, too fractured in its history for anything to spread cleanly. Some sectors awakened more quickly than others. In the mid-level hab stacks, where the ceilings were low and the air tasted of old oil and warm metal, people began to speak to each other differently. Words came slower, softer, not cautious but considered, as though every sentence carried weight and no one wished to bruise the air. A mother washing a child's face at the communal basin paused as the child hummed. A tune she had never taught him, yet somehow she recognized. The hum matched the pulse she had felt in her chest for days. When she realized their breaths had synchronized, she froze, water dripping from her fingertips. The child only watched her, eyes wide and dark and ancient, as if waiting for her to catch up to her own memory. In the manufactorum, a young worker named Mara broke a blade press. Not by force, but by stillness. She stopped her motions mid-stroke, eyes unfocused, and the press halted above her hand. It should have crushed her instantly. Machinery does not hesitate. Machinery does not consider. yet the arm froze in place, hydraulic pressure trembling as though caught mid-thought. She pulled her hand away. The press snapped down, slamming hard enough to crack the metal base. The overseer who saw it happen said nothing. He could not decide whether the moment was a miracle or a warning. Meanwhile, in the sump levels where the water sits in long black pools reflecting nothing of the lumen glow above, the murmurs became gatherings. Not organized, not led. People simply found themselves walking the same paths, arriving at the same drainage chambers, standing beside one another without speaking. The silence between them was full, not empty, like a shared heartbeat. Sometimes one among them would begin to hum, the others would join. No one taught the melody, no one led. It rose and fell like breath. The enforcers began to lose cohesion. They were trained to respond to unrest, to riot, to physical threat. They were not trained to respond to quiet. The absence of defiance created a void they could not fill. Some enforcers found themselves lingering near gathering points, shields held uselessly at their sides. Some removed their helmets to hear the humming more clearly. A few closed their eyes. But there were others, ones who clung to certainty like armor. One squad, called to investigate the unusual quiet in a refugee hab tier, moved through the narrow corridor with practiced formation. Shields forward, mauls charged, boots in perfect rhythm. Their steps echoed in perfect cadence with the hum in the walls. They felt it. They tried to ignore it. The squad sergeant signaled a halt. He could hear the humming now, clearly, not loud, not intrusive, inviting. He ordered the squad to advance. His voice wavered. Two of the enforcers hesitated. Just one heartbeat of hesitation, enough. The sergeant struck them both with the flat of his shock maul, not to harm, to command. But the moment his maul touched armor, the hum surged through the contact point. The sergeant stumbled, his visor fogged. He tasted sweetness on his tongue and salt in his eyes. He saw, not a vision, not a hallucination, but memory. Something old, something soft, something from before fear had become iron. He did not speak. He dropped the maul. It struck the floor, sparks flaring, and the sound echoed through the corridor like a bell toll. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was not calm. It was awake. Jalen felt it from across the hive. Everyone who had descended felt it. Awakening is not peaceful. It is recognition, and recognition is irreversible. Sarah stood in her hab-block doorway, the mask hanging at her side. She did not need to put it on. The resonance that had settled into her had grown. It glowed in her stillness, in her breath, in the quiet intensity of her gaze. She walked into the corridor. People stepped aside, not out of fear, not deference, but alignment. The hive lights flickered. Not in failure, in rhythm, a tremor rolled through the floor. Gentle, like a slow inhale rising from the deep layers below. Somewhere beneath the city, beneath the cavern and the shaft and the spirals carved into stone, something turned. Not fully, not yet, but enough to be felt. The hive was no longer dreaming alone. Its people were beginning to dream with it. The change did not erupt into chaos. It unfolded into clarity. That was what terrified those who still clung to the old order. There was no frenzy, no wild chanting, no sudden rapture of bodies in motion. The hive did not rise in revolt. It simply changed its posture, as if shifting its weight from one foot to another, settling deeper into itself. In the manufactorum, workers no longer shouted to be heard over the machinery. They moved with fluid precision, as if sharing a single rhythm. Tools passed from hand to hand without request. Breaks happened simultaneously, without command. No one spoke about it. They simply understood, and understanding is more threatening than anger. Overseers found themselves unable to shout. Not because they feared retaliation, but because raising their voice felt wrong, like shouting in a sacred place. They watched their workers, unsure of whether productivity had increased or simply become irrelevant. They looked at one another, unsure whether to report what they were seeing or to accept it. The Mechanicus adepts, bound by doctrine and machine code and centuries of ritual, were the first to sense danger in the change. Their augmetics chirped warnings they could not interpret. Their optical implants flickered as symbols in the margins of their vision rewrote themselves. Liturgies they had recited since childhood tasted stale now, dry as ash in the mouth. One tech priest knelt before a conveyor manifold to perform a maintenance rite, voice rising in Binharic binary chants, but the machine did not respond to the rites. It responded to the hum. The conveyor halted, not with the grinding protest of failure, but with the quiet certainty of choice. The tech priest froze, mechadendrites curling inward like frightened limbs. He touched the metal differently this time, not as a master commanding obedience, but as a listener acknowledging presence. His vox grill crackled. Pattern recognition, emergent. His voice broke. Biological vocal cords took over where mechanical filters failed. It is aware. He did not scream. He did not panic. He wept, not in despair, in awe. Meanwhile, the enforcers fought themselves. Some stood in the corridors, shock malls inactive, visors up, watching people move around them with unhurried purpose. Their training demanded intervention. Their instincts insisted something was wrong, but the hum pressed gently like a hand on the back urging them to breathe, to let go, to remember. Yet not all of them were ready. One squad sealed off a manufactorum access stairwell, setting magnetic barricades and preparing stun grenades. Their squad vox was a stutter of nervous breathing and conflicting orders. Their sergeant paced, gauntlets opening and closing as if trying to wring certainty from his own skin. He spoke into his comms again and again, requesting authorization, awaiting instruction. None came. Terra did not speak. The Emperor was distant. The Ecclesiarchy was silent. The chain of command had become a thread stretched too thin. The sergeant slammed his fist into the wall and shouted the oldest certainty he still had. "We are the law here." His voice cracked on the last word. Even he heard it. The silence afterward was devastating. Sarah arrived in the upper manufactorum walkway, not accompanied by a crowd, not proclaimed, not heralded. She walked alone, her steps unhurried, her expression calm. The mask was not worn, only held at her side like a violin, held by someone who no longer needs to play to be understood. The enforcers saw her coming. Some stepped back, some stepped forward. Some froze, caught in the space between fear and recognition. Sarah stopped a few steps from the barricade. She did not speak. She did not gesture. She simply stood, breathing slowly, deliberately. Her presence was not force. It was invitation. The hum rose softly, like the first note of a song warming in a singer's chest. One enforcer lowered his shield. Another lowered his maul. The sergeant did not. He stepped forward, breath shaking, and raised his weapon. Not to strike, but to hold himself up. His voice trembled. "What are you becoming?" Sarah did not answer him with words. She stepped closer, just enough for the sergeant to see his own reflection in her eyes. What he saw there was not a monster, not a god, not a heretic. He saw himself, the version of himself before fear had taught him to obey, before duty had replaced identity, before suffering had been renamed virtue. His grip loosened. The shock maul fell. It did not clatter. It landed softly, as though the floor caught it, and the sergeant sank to his knees. Not in surrender, in release. The hum deepened, steady and warm. The hive exhaled, and above them, far above them, in levels where light still dared to shine through smog-choked skylights, someone began to scream, not from horror, from awakening. The scream traveled through the hive like a fissure cracking stone. It did not echo, it resonated. It vibrated through ductwork and bulkheads, through manufactorum gantries and hab-block walls. It was not a call for help, it was not terror or agony. It was recognition so complete that the body could not contain it. The scream came from a pilgrim hab tier on the mid-levels, a place where people had long clung to relics and tokens of faith handed down through generations. A place where prayer had once felt sacred. Now it felt thin. The woman who screamed had once been devout, her hands calloused from clutching an imperial rosary carved from bone. She had knelt before statues, burned candles until her fingers were wax-scarred, whispered litanies in the dark to push back despair. But now the prayer had changed, not in words, in feeling. She had dreamed of the cavern. She had dreamed of the spirals. She had dreamed of warmth rising from beneath the stone. And when she woke, kneeling beside the crude stone icon of the Emperor in her single-room dwelling, she realized she had never prayed to something far above. She had always prayed to something close. Her scream was a release of decades of hunger that had never been fed. And once it was heard, others began to feel it. In corridors, in assembly lines, in oxygen recycling sectors, in sump reclamation pools, someone would stop mid-motion, hand frozen around a tool, a cup, a railing, and inhale sharply as though remembering a lover's name they had not spoken in years. The hive had begun to dream in unison. Where one remembered, another awakened. Where one awakened, 10 remembered. This was not belief spreading. This was memory thawing. Above, the ecclesiarchy minister stared at his cracked statue, his hands trembling. The stone face of the emperor looked back at him, but now he felt no presence in it. No warmth, no guidance, only cold plaster. Shaped devotion without source. He whispered, "If this is heresy, why does it feel like truth?" His voice broke. He was alone. And yet, he felt watched, not by judgment, by understanding. He lowered his head. He did not pray, he listened. In the manufactorum, Sarah walked among the workers. She did not preach. She did not command. She did not need to speak. The hum traveled with her, though she did not produce it. The workers looked up from their stations and held her gaze. Their expressions did not shift. No fear, no awe, no pleading. Only recognition. They knew her. Not as a leader, as a reflection, as what they could become. Jalen moved at her side. He was not her counterpart or her protector. He simply was. They were not symbols. They were not prophets. They were witnesses to something unfolding through them. But change, no matter how quiet, draws attention. A Vox siren crackled to life in the manufactorum rafters. A voice, strained, shaking, trying to command authority it no longer possessed, echoed through the hall. All workers are to report for mandatory loyalty confirmation, it called. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary. The siren cut out mid-syllable, not because it malfunctioned, because the hive did not want it to finish. Silence followed. Not tension, expectation. The remaining enforcers stood in the upper walkways, gripping railings so hard their knuckles whitened inside armored gloves. Their helmets obscured their faces, but their posture betrayed them. They were cornered. Not by force, but by understanding. One of them, a young officer who had joined the enforcers to escape starvation rather than out of fervor, let his helmet drop from his head. It struck the walkway and rolled until it clattered to a stop at Sarah's feet. He looked down at her, eyes wet, chest shaking. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said. Sarah's gaze did not harden. She did not offer comfort. She simply saw him. "You don't have to believe," she said softly. His breath hitched. He swallowed. "Then what do I do?" Her answer was simple. Perhaps the simplest thing he had ever been told. "Feel." He did. He exhaled. A long, trembling, exhausted exhale. It broke him open, not into grief, into release. The hum rose, subtle, warm, steady, and for the first time in his life, the young officer felt the hive breathe with him. The manufactorum workers began to move, not to riot, not to strike, but to gather. Quietly, naturally, certain now of what they had always been missing. The hive was dreaming, and the dream was becoming shared reality, not story, not prophecy, not doctrine. Something far older, something communal, something human. The city was awakening to itself, and the things that slept below had not yet begun to speak, but they were listening, very closely. The hive did not transform all at once. Awakening is rarely clean. Even as some breathed with the hum and moved with the rhythm of the living city, others fought the change with every scrap of certainty they still possessed. They clung to doctrine like a drowning man clings to wreckage, not because it would save them, but because letting go meant admitting the sea had already taken them. On the upper manufactorum gantry, an enforcer captain watched the floor below with a face carved from iron. His armor was immaculate, freshly polished, a relic of authority in a place where authority no longer held meaning. His hand rested on the grip of his bolt pistol, as though it could preserve the world he understood through the simple promise of violence. He did not hear the hum as invitation. He heard it as intrusion. He was a man who had only ever known certainty in the form of command. Orders passed down, orders obeyed, and the world arranged into obedience around him. He believed in structure, in hierarchy, in suffering as discipline, in fear as foundation. The hum offered none of these. It offered release. To him, release was death. He raised the pistol, slow and deliberate, sighting down the barrel at Sarah's heart. The manufactorum froze. No word was shouted, no warning given. No one rushed to stop him. The hive did not lurch into chaos. The hum did not spike in alarm. Sarah only looked up at him. Her expression did not change. Not defiant, not pleading, not resigned. Open. The captain's finger tightened around the trigger, and his weapon did nothing. Not jammed, not misfired, not disabled. The pistol simply did not shoot. The trigger moved, the mechanism cycled, the pin struck the charge, but the weapon did not respond, because the weapon did not want to. His breath caught in his throat. He tried again and again. The pistol remained silent. Like a machine refusing a command it no longer recognized as meaningful. His knees buckled. Not from fear, from understanding. The captain sank against the railing, bolt pistol held loosely in his hand, eyes wide and lost. "What are you?" he whispered down to Sarah. The question was raw, human, a plea carved out from everything he had believed. Sarah stepped closer, not to stand over him, not to claim victory, but to close the distance between two people who had been separated by roles neither had chosen. "We are what we were before we were broken," she said. The words were not hers. They were the hive's memory, spoken through her lungs and tongue, shaped in her breath. The captain bowed his head. The pistol slipped from his grip and struck the metal grate with a sound that carried like a final punctuation mark. The manufactorum exhaled, not in triumph, in relief. More workers gathered now, not to follow, but to align, not to worship, but to remember themselves. Conversations passed like the brush of fingertips, quiet, patient, shared. Laughter returned, not loud, not manic, but warm and tired, like a fire rekindled after years of cold stone. and the hive responded. Pipes pulsed gently, like arteries beneath skin. Bulkheads vibrated in slow, steady rhythm. Machinery worked without strain, without groaning metal or flashing alarms. The city had become a single, breathing body, and its people had become its blood. But not everyone was inside the dream. Far above, in the spires where the smog thinned into the suggestion of sky, the governor of the hive stared out over the sprawling darkness. Vox reports lay scattered across his desk, fragmented, contradictory, unnervingly calm in their descriptions of what was unfolding below. He did not understand the language of the reports, but he understood one truth. Order was dissolving. Not in fire, not in revolt, in something far more dangerous: unity. He turned toward the robed figure beside him, a member of the planetary ecclesiarchy conclave, his expression drawn, eyes sunken from sleepless nights of prayer that had returned nothing but silence. The governor's voice trembled. "Tell me that the Emperor sees this." The priest did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was hollow. "The Emperor sees all." But his gaze was distant, uncertain, afraid, because he had begun to dream too. Below, in the manufactorum, Sarah lifted the mask once more. She did not wear it. She held it out. This time she offered it not to Jalen, nor to one of the underhivers, nor to the frightened enforcers. She held it toward everyone, and the hum rose, like a slow sunrise, like warmth climbing through cold stone, like a memory returning to those who had long forgotten they were part of something whole. The hive was no longer merely dreaming, it was waking, and the world above would feel it soon, very soon. At first, the spread of awakening was quiet. Too quiet for those in power to see. But quiet things are never harmless in a hive. Quiet is where pressure builds. Quiet is where the world reshapes itself before anyone can stop it. And when quiet breaks, it does not do so gently. It began in the transit tunnels that ran like arteries between manufactorums, hab blocks, and the ecclesiarchy chapels above. The tunnels had always been crowded, shoulder to shoulder, bodies pressed together in the tired shuffle of necessity. But now, the crowds did not move with deadened exhaustion. They moved with intention. They gathered, they swayed, they breathed together. The humming that had once been confined to cavern and bone was now carried in human lungs. People began to sing. Not hymns of the ecclesiarchy, not praise to the emperor, not chants learned from catechisms etched on data slates or taught by priests with tired eyes. These songs had no words. Their melody rose and fell like breath, like heartbeats, like tides. It resonated in stone, in steel, in the marrow of those who listened. The transit tunnels became echo chambers, amplifying the sound until entire levels could feel it, vibrating through handrails and lift platforms. Some called it beautiful. Some called it madness. Both were right. The priests thundered sermons in response. They pounded their fists against altars and demanded obedience with hoarse voices. They told the people that dreams were temptation, that unity outside sanctioned doctrine was corruption, that there was only one path to salvation, and it was paved with obedience and suffering. But their words landed hollow. They felt like echoes of a time that had already ended. One priest, young, only recently ordained, still naive enough to believe that faith could save anything, traveled into the transit tunnels to confront the gathering crowds. He lifted the imperial aquila carved from lacquered wood and held it above his head until his arms trembled. His voice, though thin, held conviction. "The Emperor has not abandoned you," he cried. "You must not abandon him." Hundreds of faces turned toward him, none hostile, none mocking, only calm, only present, only awake. The priest stepped forward. Aquila raised higher. You are being deceived. Whatever calls to you below does not love you. It only seeks." He stopped, because he heard it. Not the humming, not the chorus, the breathing. The hive exhaled through him, his hands loosened. The aquila slipped from his grip and struck the stone floor with a dull sound that made the crowd flinch as though struck themselves. The priest stared at his empty hands as if they no longer belonged to him. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes, and when he finally spoke, the words were a whisper no louder than the breath of the city itself. "I thought I understood him." No one corrected him. No one claimed he was wrong. Understanding had become a fluid thing. Above, the governor finally sent orders for mobilization. Regiments of the Astra Militarum stationed in the hive's upper mustering yards began to move. Chimeras rumbled across loading decks. Lacerifles were inspected. Officers barked orders that tasted of desperation even as they tried to sound absolute. They did not descend immediately. They did not want to. Even trained soldiers, even those conditioned to obey without hesitation, felt the hum through the plating beneath their boots, felt the air vibrating faintly against their skin, felt the strange, warm pressure of something listening. Reports came up. Workers gathering in non-violent assemblies, large numbers, no leader identified. Enforcers passive, many unresponsive. Ecclesiarchy presence fractured, sermons ineffective. The governor asked one question over and over: "Is it rebellion?" No one answered. Because rebellion requires rage. This was not rage, this was transformation. And transformation is harder to kill. The first fractures appeared in the spires, where nobles lived behind Atmos-sealed glass and perfumed ventilation. They watched the hive below shift, not like smoke, but like muscle. They saw the manufactorums pulse with synchronized rhythm. They heard reports of workers moving as if guided by one breath. They felt the pressure of a truth too large to look at directly. Some fled, some fortified, some tried to pray, but prayer could no longer rise upward, not in a hive where the divine had begun to awaken below. Meanwhile, on the manufactorum floor, Sarah stood with the mask at her side. The workers did not chant her name. They did not kneel. They did not worship. They stood with her, as equals, as parts of the same living city. The hum rose again. This time, it carried voices, not singular, not commanding. A chorus of memory, a choir of the forgotten, a liturgy spoken in breath and bone, a waking hymn, a beginning. The waking hymn did not rise like a shouted anthem. It unfolded like warmth spreading beneath skin. One voice emerged first, not louder, not more certain, simply first. A cracked, tired voice belonging to an old man who had worked at the same bolt-tightening station for 47 years. His spine was bent, his fingers twisted from strain, his lungs scarred from recycled air. He had not spoken a full sentence in weeks. There had never been breath to spare. Now, he sang. The sound was not beautiful in any traditional sense. It wavered, it broke, but it was true, and truth resonates. Another voice rose with his, then another, then dozens, then hundreds. The manufactorum floor became a trembling ocean of song, wordless, boundless, rising and falling like the very breath of the hive. Machinery adjusted to the rhythm. Pistons slowed to match the pulse. Conveyors glided in long, fluid sweeps. The great forge cranes suspended their loads mid-air, hovering with the stillness of birds at rest. The hive was no longer functioning. It was listening. The Astra Militarum deployment squads advanced at last, not because they wanted to, but because they were ordered, and discipline holds long after belief fails. Chimeras rumbled to the mid-tier access platforms, their engines growling, exhaust hissing into the smog-thick corridors. Vox chatter stuttered with clipped, brittle commands. Secure the ingress. Crowd control protocols only. Fire only if… Static swallowed the end of the sentence. Not interference. Refusal. The commander slammed his Vox unit, swearing between his teeth. He turned to his troops, men and women who had known war more intimately than they had known rest. Helmets sealed, mauls to stun. No hesitation, we restore order. A soldier in the front rank adjusted her grip on her laser gun. Her eyes were steady, but her breathing betrayed her. Beneath the armored plating of her chest piece, her heartbeat faltered, trying to match something she did not yet understand. The chimeras advanced into the manufactorum sector. No one ran, no one shouted. The workers parted, moving with calm clarity, forming an open corridor toward Sarah, who stood as if she had expected this. She raised no hand. She gave no signal, she simply remained. The soldiers hesitated. They had expected a mob. They had expected violence. They had expected the familiar, comfortable pattern of force met with force. Instead, they faced a quiet unity they could not break. One of the soldiers, a young man, too young, the kind who had been raised on recruitment posters rather than memory, stepped forward before his commander ordered it. His boots echoed in the silence as he approached Sarah, lasgun held but not aimed. He stopped only a few paces away. His voice cracked open on the first word. Why are you doing this?" It was not accusation, it was longing. Sarah looked at him, and her gaze held stories older than any sermon. She spoke softly, her voice carrying like breath in a warm room. "We are remembering who we were before the city forgot us." The soldier swallowed. "That's not treason?" Sarah stepped closer, not invading his space but meeting him. "No." Her voice was warm. "It's homecoming." The soldier's grip loosened on his weapon. His commander's did not. The commanding officer stepped forward, face shuttered behind his rebreather helm, voice cold and mechanical through the Vox grill. "You will disperse. Now, by Imperial decree." The hum swelled. Not loud, not violent, certain. The officer faltered mid-sentence, hand tightening around his weapon as though the world itself was slipping out from under him. He tried to shout again, but the breath did not come. The air felt thick, as though it belonged to someone else. The crowd did not advance. They did not glare. They simply watched him, seeing him. Not as uniform, not as authority, as a man terrified of what happens when obedience no longer defines him. The officer's visor fogged. His voice broke. "What do you want from us?" Sarah's answer came like a hand resting gently over a wound. To stop suffering as though it were sacred. The silence that followed was not fragile. It was alive, vibrating, growing. The soldier who had stepped forward first exhaled. A trembling, exhausted exhale that seemed to release a lifetime of pressure. He removed his helmet. He let it fall. The sound it made when it struck the floor was soft, like something being put down finally. The hum deepened, and the waking spread. Further, higher, faster. The hive did not move toward war. The hive moved toward remembering. The Astra Militarum line wavered, not breaking, changing, breathing. For the first time in decades, the manufactorum floor was not a place of labor. It was a place of becoming. The hive had always been loud, machines grinding, Vox sirens blaring, boots marching, sermons echoing. But as the awakening spread, sound changed. Noise no longer drowned human thought. Sound became communication, harmony, breath. In the manufactorum, the Astra Militarum line stood suspended, not in paralysis but in a moment of recognition too profound to move through quickly. Soldiers who had trained their whole lives to react without hesitation found that hesitation was now the only honest response. Their fingers hovered near triggers not out of discipline, but because pulling them felt wrong, like trying to speak while holding a breath meant for someone else. The commanding officer's visor still hid his face. He was breathing hard behind it, struggling, as though something inside him was being peeled back. Not forcibly, not violently, just revealed. He tried to speak again, but his voice tangled in his throat. His training had never prepared him for a world where order fractured not through rebellion, but through understanding. He took one step backward, only one, but the shift rippled, the formation behind him loosened, shields lowered, not in surrender, in alignment. The line of soldiers became individuals again, people. Sarah did not move to claim authority. She did not step forward to speak. She simply held the mask at her side, her breath slow, steady, deep. The air around her pulsed with quiet certainty. Then, a new sound entered the manufactorum, a low, resonant chant. Not from the workers, not from the soldiers, not from Sarah or Jalen, from the hive itself. A vibration in the walls, a tone rising beneath the floor. A frequency that traveled through ribcage and skull, not as sound, but as sensation. It was not a command. It was not instruction. It was remembrance, and remembrance has gravity. Jalen closed his eyes. He had been waiting for this without knowing he had been waiting. He felt the hum in his spine, in the base of his skull, blooming outward like a tide rising against the shore. His breath matched the rhythm before he realized he was breathing in time with something older than the city, older than industry, older than suffering. The workers around him swayed, not in trance but in attunement. The soldiers' breathing slowed, helmets fogging with the heat of their own exhale. Even the machines paused to listen. The commanding officer broke first. His bolter slipped from his hand. His knees struck the walkway, not in defeat, but in collapse, like a pillar realizing it had been holding weight it never needed to bear. He tore his helmet free, and his face, lined, exhausted, bearing years of duty that had calcified into identity, was wet with tears. "I don't know who I am without orders," he whispered. It was not a confession, it was grief. Sarah knelt in front of him, not above, not below. She placed her palm gently over his chest plate, just above the heart. "You were never meant to be only what you were told to be." The officer's breath shook. For the first time in a very long time, he allowed himself to inhale fully. The hum deepened. It was not exultation, it was relief. But not all corners of the hive softened. Deep in the spire, the governor's palace had moved from denial to control. Data feeds streamed with reports of unauthorized gatherings and mass noncompliance. Voxcasters broadcast emergency decrees, orders to remain in assigned sectors, proclamations that peaceful unity was a symptom of sedition. But the words were weak, they lacked breath. The governor paced his chamber, robes dragging across marble tiled centuries ago by hands that no longer existed. He stared at the statues of imperial heroes lining the walls, towering figures carved in valorous poses, their faces locked in eternal resolve. Yet they looked hollow now, cold. Their eyes were stone, not memory. He turned to the ecclesiarchy priest at his side. "Tell me what litany stops this," he demanded. The priest's gaze was unfocused, distant, as though listening to something the governor could not hear. "There is a prayer older than doctrine," the priest murmured. "But we have forgotten the words." The governor slammed his fist against the statue's pedestal. "I will not lose this city," the priest blinked. "You already have. Not to enemy, not to rebellion, to awakening." Back in the manufactorum, Sarah rose to her feet. The hum followed her, warm and steady, like the inhale before dawn. Jalen stepped beside her. The workers closed in, not in crowding but in unity. The soldiers did not retreat. There was no line anymore, only presence, only breath, only memory. The hive's dream had reached the surface, but dreams, once awakened, become direction. And now the city was beginning to move, not physically, consciously. The palace had windows once, great vaulted panes of reinforced glass overlooking the upper hive. But over centuries, smog and ash and time had turned them into dull, stained mirrors. The governor stood before them now, his reflection a warped silhouette swallowed by the dim orange glow of burning manufactorum stacks far below. He watched the hive move, not like a machine of industry, but like something breathing. A shiver passed through him, not from cold. The air was warm, too warm. Heat signatures rising, a junior officer stammered, as he reviewed Auspec's readouts. Not from fires, from the structure itself. The governor did not turn. "The city is alive," the priest whispered behind him. The governor's jaw clenched. "All cities are alive. They grow, they change, they—" "Not like this." The priest's voice was thin, stretched, not with pulse, not with dream. The governor finally faced him. His eyes were sharp now, sharpened by fear into something almost lucid. "Then tell me what is waking." The priest opened his mouth. No words came because the answer was beneath them, and the answer was breathing. Below, deep within the manufacturum sector, the change continued, not outward, but inward. People did not declare a new order. They simply remembered the old one, not the old of Imperial archive or pre-heresy myth or archaeotech dream. Older, the memory of being together, the memory of human life not measured in quotas or rations or compliance but in presence. Sarah walked with the mask held at her side. She did not lift it. She did not need to. The resonance had passed into her, and through her into others. She was not a leader, she was a lens. Jalen moved behind her. He was quieter now, not withdrawn, but listening. He heard the hive the way ocean dwellers hear tides, not with ears, with the whole body. Every shift of air, every flicker of lumen glow, every tremor in the floor told him when the hive was thinking. And the hive was thinking now. Something was rising from below, not a creature, not a presence, not a voice, but a remembering. The weight of it made the air taste metallic, as though everyone had bitten the inside of their cheek at the same time. Workers placed their palms flat against walls, against floor plates, against the warm pipes that ran like veins. They whispered, not prayers, not chants, but their own names. Not to be recognized, to be real. A woman on the mezzanine level traced spirals in the dust on the railing. A boy in a hab junction placed his ear against the vent wall and laughed because he could hear something laughing back, soft and warm and enormous. An old man knelt in a ration line and wept because he felt, truly felt, someone listening to the shape of his life without asking anything from him in return. The awakening was not joy. It was relief. The kind that shakes you. The kind that leaves you breathless. The kind that feels like standing in the doorway of your own home after wandering lost for years. But awakening has gravity, and gravity pulls. Deep beneath the hive, past the transit levels, past the sump channels, past the collapsed strata of older cities long buried under new foundations of iron and industry, something shifted. Not movement, posture. The cavern where Sarah had first worn the mask was no longer silent. The spirals carved into the stone were no longer dormant. They pulsed, faint light growing and fading like breath. The heat rising from the abyss had changed. It no longer felt like the exhale of something sleeping. It felt like the inhale of something beginning to wake. The elder of the underhive, the one who had guided them before, stood in the cavern alone. The light caught her face and made her look younger, as though the years had been peeled away like dust from old marble. She whispered into the abyss, "They remember," and the abyss breathed back. Warm, slow, patient. Above, every lumen strip in the manufactorum dimmed at once. Not flickered, dimmed. Not as failure, as reverence. Sarah lifted her head. The humming stopped. Every heart in the hive seemed to pause. For a moment there was only silence, not emptiness, expectation. The kind of silence that comes just before a voice speaks a first word that will change everything that follows. The silence did not last long. It was not meant to. Silence is only the space where meaning gathers itself before it takes shape. The first sound to break it was breath, not human breath. The hive's breath. A slow inhale rising from the deep stone layers, through the foundations, through the support beams, through the pipes still warm with circulating air. The walls vibrated with it. The floors resonated. The air thickened. Not with pressure, not with heat, but with presence. People steadied themselves instinctively, feet widening, shoulders lowering, as though bracing for something immense to pass through them. But no weight came, no command, no shaping force, only welcome. Sarah closed her eyes. The mask hung at her side, but it did not glow, did not activate, did not compel. It was no longer the conduit, it was memory now. Artifact, reminder. The resonance lived in the people themselves. The manufactorum workers bowed their heads, not in worship, not in surrender, just to listen more closely. Jalen felt it in his bones. Not a voice, a pressure, a warmth, a gravity of meaning spreading through marrow. He did not need to interpret it. Meaning before language does not require explanation. It only requires presence. The soldiers felt it too. Their formation was gone now, not broken, dissolved. They stood among workers, armor pressed against worn cloth and stained coveralls, distinctions stripped away as gently as dust in warm water. Some soldiers cried, some laughed, soft, disbelieving, exhausted laughter. Some simply breathed as if truly breathing for the first time. The commanding officer, still on his knees, looked up at Sarah. His eyes, now free of visor and rank and certainty, were raw. "What is it doing to us?" Sarah shook her head, voice a whisper. "It is not doing. We are remembering ourselves." The words moved through the hive like a ripple across still water, and far above in the palace the governor felt the same ripple. It passed through him with unmistakable clarity, and for one fragile instant, truth cracked his certainty open. He could have surrendered to it. But fear is a powerful architect. He turned sharply toward his communications officers. "Launch the suppression protocols. Lock the transit shafts. Seal the manufactorum sectors. No one moves without authorization." One of the officers hesitated. Just one heartbeat. Enough. The governor's voice sharpened to a blade's edge. "That is a direct order." The officer swallowed and pressed the control rune. Deep, booming shutters began to roll into place across the mid-tier access corridors. Massive hydraulic gates sealed sector junctions. Emergency flood barriers slammed shut. Transit lifts froze in place with a shriek of metal on metal. Whole sectors of the hive were locked into isolation, but the governor misunderstood the order of things. He believed containment began with walls. He had not understood that the hive was already awake. The gates slammed. The hum did not falter. The humming grew, not louder, closer, because walls are meaningless to something that lives inside bone. Sarah exhaled. She did not react with anger. She did not call for resistance. She did not turn to rally or command. She simply stepped forward and placed her palm against the nearest manufactorum bulkhead. The metal warmed under her touch. The hum shifted in pitch. A gentle rise, like a question asked. Jalen stepped beside her and did the same. Workers followed, soldiers followed, hands touched steel, stone, pipe, railing, and the hive answered. The barriers the governor had sealed began to tremble, not violently, not forcefully, slowly, patiently, as though softened from within, as though the material remembered being part of something whole before it was forced to divide itself. The metal relaxed, not bent, not broke, relaxed, and the sealed corridor opened, not with force, with ease. When the gates parted, there was no triumphal cheer, only breath, shared, steady, certain. The hive would not be contained, not by decree, not by fear, not by anything built on suffering. The governor watched through a flickering hololith feed as the seals unmade themselves. He felt something break in him, not sanity, not resolve, identity. He was very small now, and the city was very large. In the cavern below, the elder smiled, not with triumph, with recognition. "It is waking," she whispered. This time, the abyss did not respond with warmth. It responded with light, faint, slow, like the first flicker of sunrise cresting the horizon of a world long forgotten. The hive was not finished becoming, it was only beginning. Names are powerful things, not the ones assigned by overseers, recorded in ledgers, stamped onto identity papers, or etched into HAB registration plaques. Those names are labels, administrative shapes to fit human beings into machinery. The hive had been known by many such names: designations, planetary indexes, production quotas, military value ratings, shipping codes. Names meant to classify, names meant to contain. But beneath every given name lies the true one, the one spoken in the marrow of a place, the one shaped by the first hands to carve stone, the one whispered by the first people to call a place home. That name does not disappear, it only waits. When the hive breathed now, that name stirred. The awakening spread from sector to sector, not like fire and not like contagion, but like the slow thaw of ice under a rising spring. It began in the lungs of the people, in the rhythm of their breath, in the steady shared hum that moved through bodies and into walls. The city listened. And memory, once stirred, does not return gently. Sarah felt it first, not as clarity, but as deep recognition. The resonance that had moved through her in the cavern was no longer a signal. It was identity. Not hers alone. Shared, multiplied, distributed across every person who had stood in the warmth of that breath rising from below. She walked through the manufactorum, and every footfall landed in rhythm with the hive's pulse. Not because she willed it, because there was no longer a difference between her intention and the city's. Jalen followed, though he did not walk beside her now. He walked in parallel, connected, aligned, not lesser, not greater. A chord beside her note. His silence had become its own language, and those around him listened as though something important moved in the spaces between his breaths. The enforcers had no formation now. Their armor hung open at the neck. Their weapons were carried but unused. Some kept them for comfort, not as tools of control, but as relics of a life they were slowly setting aside. Others had discarded theirs entirely, leaving shock mauls on steel grates, laser guns resting against cooling engines, bolt pistols abandoned like shed skin. The Astra Militarum squads did not leave the manufactorum. They did not retreat, they simply remained, not trapped, not stationed, present. The hum had taken root in their bodies as well, not as command, not as indoctrination, but as permission to feel something they had not felt since childhood. Belonging. Above, in the palace, The governor watched feed after feed return static. He paced the chamber with the growing realization that the world he governed had slipped beyond him. It had not risen against him. It had simply continued without him. Isolation is the true fear of rulers. Control is its remedy. He issued order after order into vox units that crackled back no acknowledgement. The ecclesiarchy priest beside him stared at nothing, head tilted as though hearing a lullaby, just below perception. His hands trembled around his rosary. He was no longer praying, he was remembering. And memory is dangerous to those who have built their lives on forgetting. Below, in the sump levels, the first true sign of the city's awakening took form. A wall, one of the countless ancient support plates layered across centuries, shifted. Not mechanically, not slowly. Like muscle flexing beneath skin, the metal rippled, groaned. The bolts securing it twisted free, falling with hollow chimes into the stagnant water. The wall eased open, not broken, opened, revealing a corridor no one had walked in living memory. The air that poured out of it was warm, not industrial heat, body heat, presence. Sarah stopped mid-step. Her breath caught. She did not turn to Jalen. She did not need to. He had already stopped. 100 people gathered behind them without being called. Not in formation, not in ranks, simply drawn. Drawn the way one is drawn to a familiar door after a long journey. Sarah stepped forward, not boldly, not fearfully, naturally. The threshold of the newly opened passage waited like a held breath. Jalen murmured, not in warning, not in hesitation. "What is this place?" Sarah's voice was quiet. A memory. The air shimmered along the corridor walls, as though light were trying to remember how to exist. The hive was showing them something, not telling, showing. The city was remembering itself, and it wanted its people to walk with it. Sarah stepped into the corridor. The hum deepened, the hive exhaled, and the city spoke its first word in 10,000 years, not aloud, in the blood, home. The corridor was not dark. It should have been sealed for centuries, abandoned, unreachable. But no grime clung to the walls, no corrosion ate the metal, no dust layered the floor. The passage glowed with a faint warmth, as if it had been waiting, tended by something unseen. Sarah walked at the center of the group, but the notion of leading had dissolved. The movement was collective, breath to breath, step to step, a body of many limbs. The walls were covered in reliefs, not carved by human tools nor stamped by manufacturing presses. These images flowed organically, like mineral shaped by patient water or clay shaped by the slow pressure of living hands. Spirals, yes, but not the spirals of the cavern. These spirals unfurled into forms, faces, hands, sleepers curled in fetal rest, children lifting lamps, bodies kneeling not in worship, but in welcome. Jalen ran his fingertips along the wall. It pulsed faintly beneath his skin, warm as flesh, gentle as heartbeat. He whispered, almost afraid to disturb the air. This was here before the hive. Sarah nodded. Her voice held no surprise. The hive was built on top of it. The city forgot. We forgot. But it didn't. The corridor widened. The floor sloped downward, soft metal becoming polished stone. Not the gray stone of imperial cathedrals, nor the marble of noble estates. This stone was red gold, veined like living tissue, lit from within by an unflickering glow. The group stopped at the edge of a vast chamber. Its ceiling arched like the inside of a rib cage, its walls curved like the walls of a womb. And at its center lay something vast. Not a throne, not an altar, not a machine, but a structure shaped like a heart. Not a biological heart, a city heart, a place where breath gathered, where time pooled, where memory slept. It pulsed, slow, patient, alive. Jalen's knees weakened, not from fear, from recognition he could not explain. Sarah stared at the pulsing structure and did not blink. "This is what the hive is built around." The others murmured, soft sounds of understanding rising like tide foam. The city did not awaken from nothing. It reawakened. Memory is not the acquisition of something new. It is the return of something once known. But even revelation brings questions. A soldier with a trembling jaw spoke first. "What is it? What does it mean? What are we becoming?" Sarah stepped closer to the heart. The hum rose, not louder, but clearer, like a speaker lifting from water. "It's not changing us," she said. "It's reminding us we were never meant to live divided and afraid. We were never meant to breathe alone." Another voice, an old woman, hands blackened with forge ash, shook as she asked, "But why now?" Jalen answered this time, "Because we were finally quiet enough to hear it." The room trembled, not violently, with relief. The heart brightened, not dramatically, gently, like a lamp being lit in a child's bedroom. Sarah raised the mask, but she did not put it on. She placed it at the foot of the heart, and the mask dissolved, not burned, not melted, dissolved, returned. Returned to whatever had first given it form. Returned to the memory that had now become present. The hum spread through the chamber, a wave rolling through the minds and chests of everyone gathered. Some cried, some laughed, some sank to their knees as though exhausted from carrying a weight they had never known was theirs. But then, from the top of the chamber, echoing down the corridor came a new sound. Not the hum, not the hive's breath. A scream, raw, human, born of terror. One of the soldiers turned toward the source, eyes wide with shock. "They've forced the governor into the lower levels. He's trying to flee." Sarah did not move at first. She did not react with anger or urgency. She breathed, slow. She looked at the group, not to instruct, not to compel. "We go to him. Not to punish, not to stop, to bring him into the memory of home. But fear makes people dangerous, and the governor was afraid." As they turned back toward the corridor, Jalen glanced once more at the pulsing heart at the chamber center. It pulsed again, and the pulse answered him. "We are not finished." The city was awakening, the people were remembering, and the one who could not bear memory was running. They emerged from the corridor into the wider hive like figures returning from a dream, though the dream did not fade. The manufactorum lights flickered once, not with instability but with acknowledgement, then steadied. The hum that had once been subtle now lay beneath every sound, like the low resonance of a planet's crust shifting under tectonic weight. The workers and soldiers moved together, not in formation and not in chaos. Just together, breathing the same air, feeling the same gravity. The distance between one person and another had thinned to something almost tender. But fear travels quickly. Word of the governor's descent had already spread. Not through Vox, not through runners, not through any ordered chain, but through intuition. People simply knew, not with logic, with memory. The hive remembered him too. He ran because he could not understand what he was seeing. The corridor lights around him buzzed and dimmed as though unwilling to witness his panic. His boots splashed through shallow runoff water in the maintenance levels, the echo of each footfall chasing him like something alive. The ecclesiarchy priest followed, stumbling. One hand braced against a sputtering lumen panel. He no longer carried his aquila. He had left it behind without realizing his fingers had opened. "Governor," he gasped, voice catching. "We must stop. We must—" The governor whirled, eyes wild. "Do not tell me to stop. They have lost themselves." The priest stared back, breath ragged, robes torn from catching on rusted railings. "They have found themselves. the governor's expression fractured. For a heartbeat, grief flickered through the fear. Grief so deep it was nearly grief for the world itself. Then it hardened again, brittle as old plaster. "No," he whispered, no. "If I surrender to this, if I let this spread, what remains of me?" The priest did not answer, because the governor already knew. He was not running from the hive. He was running from the end of the self he had built to survive it. Sarah and the others descended through the access shafts that had once been guarded checkpoints. Now the gates slid aside like parting veils. The hive did not resist them. The hive invited. Cold metal railings warmed beneath fingertips. The dim, recycled air carried traces of old incense from forgotten chapels. Everything felt like memory opening. Jalen walked beside her, though neither led. He had not spoken since leaving the heart chamber, but his silence was not absence. It was listening. The hum pulsed through him in slow, steady waves, and his heartbeat matched it. When they reached the drainage corridor where the governor had fled, the noise of his boots had already vanished. The space was thick with echo and dripping condensation. Rows of rusted pipes ran overhead like the ribs of some great beast. The floor was slick with moisture and old grime softened by warmth. The priest was there, alone now. He stood in the center of the corridor, his arms hanging at his sides, eyes still, expression quiet. When he saw Sarah, he almost smiled, not in relief, but in recognition. He went ahead, he said softly, down into the sumptier reservoirs, into the heat shafts. Sarah nodded. "He is afraid of being seen." The priest closed his eyes. "I was afraid too." Sarah waited. The priest's breath steadied. "When I first heard the hum, I thought it was heresy. Then I heard it again, and I thought it was mercy. Now I hear it, and I understand." He looked up at her, face illuminated by the dim amber glow of lumen strips that felt warmer now than they ever had. "No one is alone in this city anymore?" Jalen stepped closer. His voice was low, a resonance in the chest more than the air. "Come with us." The priest nodded, not as obedience, as acceptance. They moved deeper, following the corridor downward, where steam rose in coils and the stone walls grew slick with condensation. The hum thickened, not oppressive, not loud, just more present, like the city's heartbeat was closer to the surface. The governor was somewhere ahead of them, not far, running out of space to run. The hive did not close around him, it simply stopped letting him escape. Sarah did not hurry. Transformation does not require pursuit. The corridor opened into a vast sump chamber, a cathedral of rust and heat. Massive engines churned below the grates, circulating warmth into the hive's bones. The air shimmered. Shadows shifted. The governor stood alone at the edge of the central reservoir. He did not turn. He did not speak. He only clutched the railing with white-knuckled desperation. Sarah stepped forward, not gently, not harshly, simply present. The hum filled the space, slow, steady, inevitable. The governor exhaled a shuddering breath. "What happens to me?" he whispered, "if I let go?" Sarah's answer did not belong to her alone. You stop being alone. Silence, the kind that holds the moment before something breaks or heals. The governor did not turn immediately. His hands remained locked to the railing as though his bones had fused into the cold metal. The sump reservoir surged and receded below him, a slow tidal rhythm, heated by the hive's awakening heart deep beneath the strata. The air shimmered with humidity, thick enough to taste. He stared down into the heat haze, into the roiling mist, into the depths of something he could not name. Sarah waited, not patient, not impatient, present. Her breathing matched the hum vibrating through the metal grates beneath their feet. The others stood behind her, close enough to feel her presence, far enough to let the moment find its shape. Jalen watched the governor with a gaze without accusation, just recognition. The governor's voice broke out of him like something cracking open under pressure. "You don't understand. I was born into this, groomed, raised to control. My duty is order. My identity is command. If I surrender that, what is left of me?" Sarah stepped one pace closer, boots silent on the metal grate. "What was left of you before you learned to fear yourself?" His fingers tightened around the railing. The metal groaned. His breath came sharp, shallow, frantic. "You speak as if there was a before. There wasn't. I am what the hive made me, what the Imperium required me to be. I did what was necessary to keep this place functioning. I kept it alive." Sarah shook her head. Not dismissal, not contradiction, sadness. "You kept it breathing, but breathing is not living." The governor's shoulders trembled. For a moment, he looked small beneath the weight of the city, not in stature, in truth. The posture of a man who had built his identity from stone, and then discovered the stone was hollow. He whispered, voice raw enough to bleed, "If I let this in, I won't know who I am." Jalen's voice finally entered the air, quiet and sure. "That is the point." The governor's head turned, slowly, as though resisting gravity. He looked at Jalen, not with hatred, not with fear, but with a grief so old it no longer knew its origin. His eyes glistened. "What if the person I find underneath is someone I cannot bear to be?" Sarah stepped beside him now, not to confront, to stand with. "Then you will not bear it alone." The hum deepened, like a hand resting over a heartbeat. The governor's grip loosened on the railing. His palms left sweat on the cold metal. His knees bent. Not collapse, not surrender, but release. He sank to the floor, the grate hard beneath him, the sump heat rising around him like breath against the skin of a fevered child. His face lowered into his hands. He cried, not loud, not violently. He cried like someone who hadn't been touched in decades and suddenly remembered what warmth felt like. The priest knelt beside him first, not to comfort, to share the moment. Then one of the soldiers, then a worker, then another. Not in supplication, not in submission, not to elevate, not to lower, just to sit in the same shape of humanity. The hive hummed, not triumphant, homecoming. Sarah sat last, folding to the grate with the ease of someone placing something back where it belonged. She placed her hand on the governor's back, not to steady him, not to guide him, just to be there. The governor's sobbing slowed. The hum softened. The heat in the sump chamber felt less oppressive now, less suffocating. It felt like warmth, the warmth of bodies close together in winter, shared because no one survives cold alone. When the governor lifted his face, his expression was not transformed into serenity or joy or revelation. It was human, tired, soft. His voice was barely a breath. "What happens now?" Sarah looked around them, not at individuals but at the shape of together. "We remember." The hum resonated, not answer. Agreement. The governor nodded, very small, very slow. "Yes." Something shifted then. Not in the chamber, not in the air, but in the hive itself. A low resonance rolled through the foundations like thunder beneath the skin of the world. Not destruction. Awakening. The city had heard him, and it accepted him. For the first time in his life, the governor belonged somewhere that did not require his fear to maintain itself. The hive exhaled. The lights warmed, and somewhere deep below, the city heart beat once with the sound of something no longer half asleep. The awakening was complete. But awakening is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a world that must now choose what to become. The sump chamber did not empty. No one rushed to return to their workstations or barracks or living quarters. No overseer called them back, no klaxon demanded submission, no schedule reclaimed their breath. Time itself felt altered, stretched not into urgency but into presence. The hive was no longer a place of task. It had become a place of recognition. They rose slowly, not as a unit, not as a crowd, but like a tide finding its level. Some leaned on others, not from weakness, but because the body remembers touch long before the mind admits it needs it. The governor stood last. His posture was not regal now, not commanded or commanding. He stood the way a man does when he is simply standing. No one applauded, no one bowed. Nothing ceremonial marked the moment. And yet, everything had changed. Sarah looked toward the corridor that led back up through the hive. The path had not grown brighter, but it felt known now, like a stairway walked 1,000 times in memory before one ever took the first step. She began to move and the others followed, not because she led, but because the city was moving through her and through them all. They were no longer separate. As they ascended, the hum traveled ahead of them. Not as sound, but as feeling. Doors unlatched. Lifts descended without being summoned. Lights warmed in anticipation rather than flickered to life. The hive was no longer resisting their presence. It moved with them, like muscle supporting its own motion. When they reached the manufactorum floor again, no surprise greeted them. The people there already knew. They felt it the moment the governor had let go. Something in the hive's breath had eased. The tension that once thrummed like a whip through the steel bones of the city had relaxed. Workers looked up from where they sat or stood or rested their hands against warm metal. Soldiers straightened, not to attention, but to welcome. Some stepped forward to meet the returning group. Others only nodded, a gesture deeper than speech. The governor met their eyes, first one pair, then another. Not searching for threat, searching for permission, and they gave it. He bowed his head, a simple motion, a quiet one, a human one. No ceremony accompanied the gesture. No proclamation echoed through vox lines. No decree marked the shift. The city had changed, and the city itself bore witness. That was enough. Sarah stood at the center of the manufactorum floor, the same place she had stood when she first lifted the mask. But there was no artifact now, no conduit, no symbol to raise. She did not speak. There were no speeches to give. The hive did not need language to know itself. Instead, she breathed, and they breathed with her. The hum that rose then was not the hum of awakening. It was the hum of memory settling into bone. The resonance gentled, warm, full, steady. It was not the beginning of something chaotic or wild. It was the rhythm of a city remembering its own name, its own shape, its own heart. People did not kneel, they did not chant, they simply were. The hive no longer felt like a machine. It felt like a body, lived in, understood, inhabited. Not by engines and quotas and marching boots, but by people who belonged to each other finally, without fear. Above, the palace windows, long stained by soot and time, cleared. Not perfectly. Those scars remain as all scars do, but enough to see sky, not bright sky, not pure sky, but sky touched by light. The governor walked to the balcony, alone for a moment. The priest stood behind him, silent, hands folded, not in prayer, but in rest. The governor placed both palms flat against the stone railing. He looked out over the city, over its stacked layers and rising heat haze and ribboned arteries of transit rails. It breathed, and he breathed with it. Not command, not control. Belonging. Far below, Sarah stood with Jalen, shoulder to shoulder. They did not touch. They did not need to. The space between them was full. The elder from the underhive appeared at the manufactorum entrance, leaning slightly on her walking stick, though less heavily now. Her eyes met Sarah's. They exchanged no words. They shared recognition. The city had awakened, not into glory, not into conquest, into memory. The hive did not become something new. It simply stopped forgetting what it had always been: a home, a living place, a living people. And somewhere deep beneath the lowest strata, beneath the sump and heat shafts and stone layers and forgotten foundations, the heart pulsed once more. Not in warning, not in hunger, in acknowledgement. The city remembers you. You remember the city. The story does not end. It continues every time someone breathes in rhythm with another. Every time someone refuses to be alone. Every time the city hums. Every time a name is remembered instead of forgotten. The hive did not rise. It woke. And waking is the beginning of everything. End.